Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, it is Saturday. I'm off to a great start. I'm absolutely loving the morning. I'm loving nursing. I'm loving just really growing older. You know, I've kind of realized I've got this weird thing to where I don't really like to keep up with people that I've known in the past. This is a bit of a sidebar, but I like to come in with a very light intro before we get into the podcast. I don't. You know why? Because it's one of those things to where if me and this person, we weren't genuinely connected, you know what I mean? It's not someone that I really know like that. We didn't really speak. It really wasn't like a friendship, or maybe it was, but it was something that fizzled. It was something that was young, you know what I mean? Past time. I don't know why, but I just feel like these people remind me of the past. And I think that it's a huge hindrance on my trajectory to an extent. Obviously, we don't want to lean too far into that generalization because that's a pretty bold statement and we're not giving anyone that much authority over our lives. But understandably so, right? I just think that people who remain in contact with people from the past, I don't think you're really ever able to grow. You know what I mean? I don't think you're really able to go out and do new things. And I do think being a part of a small town, sometimes it kind of has its perks, right? I think one of the major benefits of being in a small town is that you really do have good morals. You know what I mean? You just got those morals. You've got a clear understanding of right and wrong. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing because it can ground you. You know what I mean? I think in a bigger city, you just kind of get lost. Anything goes. If you don't really have a shared sense of self, I think you can find yourself in some really dark places. And it's unfortunate because, when you're a bigger city, it can be a bit predatory. Right. It could be a bit, you're swimming with the big sharks, right? And that's not to invoke any sense of intimidation with anybody. But I just think sometimes small towns get a bad rep. So I just got to come out there and say it, But yeah, and so even the friends and the people that I do have from my past, I really love the relationships that we have. I think they're so healthy. You know what I mean? They're so healthy. We're not checking in on a continuous basis, right? It's I see you when you see you, you're in town. That's great. Let's link up. And it's beautiful because in their lives, they're progressing. They're doing great things. But I feel like even if I was to be connected to them on a day-to-day basis, I think that there would be a bit of a sense of hindrance there, right? I've got people that I've known who have transitioned, right? In terms of their sexual orientation. I've got people that I've known who have changed, and for me, some of those people, I like them better when they were one way, and that's not to say, because I'm not disclosing which either way, right? And that's not me being discriminatory. It's just to say, sometimes when you're connected to people from your past, it's hard to grow because for me, I'm man, I really liked it when me and this person used to da-da-da-da-da, and it's people grow and people change and they have a right to do that. And I just think that sometimes you have people like that who don't fly the coop. And I think it's weird. I have people who still stick around and stalk me. And it's really weird. It's really weird. They don't move on and I don't understand why. And that's not me being you could feel it in my, you hear what I'm saying. You hear what I'm saying. You know what I mean? It's not me being ridiculous. It's just real. You know what I mean? What is it about some people who just don't, kick the can, you know what I mean? Life goes on. I think I have a healthy sense of a desire for novelty in my life. And I feel I look forward to meeting new people. And as I get older, I have broken out of this scarcity mindset that, oh my God, I don't have any friends. Oh my God, there's not any people in the world. There's not any good people, et cetera. Thoughts like that are very much limiting beliefs. I no longer have those, so I do believe that there are more people you are going to meet in life. And I think as you change and grow, you start to develop a better sense of self. You have more boundaries. I know for me, I'm so much more, I've grown, right? Since I was my younger 20s. And I think the relationships that I have now don't reflect anything of the past, right? And so for me, I just think that if you are someone who really struggles with that, I don't know, it's a very troubling thing to be stuck in nostalgia because very seldom were things better than they are today. You know what I mean? I mean, it's kind of impossible when you really think about it. How can things be better then when you didn't know what you know now? That's just, it's a lie. It's very mindless. So if you are someone who struggles to just kind of move on and meet new people and be optimistic about the future, I'm encouraging you to do that. I'm not saying cut anybody off because of their politics and things like that. I think as we grow as humans, you have to understand people have differences, and you have to learn to tolerate those differences. Learn to find beauty in people's differences. You know what I mean? Like, I personally am not such a stickler in that way. I mean, I have my values, I have my morals, as I mentioned, but I'm not the type of person to be like, oh my God, this person doesn't agree with, the fact that I said the sky is orange. They have to go. I'm not really petty like that. And I don't encourage you guys to be. So anyway, reading Subverted has just brought so many thoughts to mind. First of all, I hated the book cover. I thought that this book was about something else. I had no idea this is what it was about. It's so good. I'm glad I finally cracked a code. A bit of a complicated read, I would say, probably level 5, level 6, just in terms of like complication, nonfiction, a lot of history there, a lot of notes about women's rights. And it's very needed. It's very needed. And I think this is why it's so important that anytime you have a modern movement, a mass movement, something everybody's doing, everybody's talking about it, and we always want to give pass for algorithms, right? Like when we say everybody, we gotta give pass, right? I met someone who was like, yeah, everybody's pregnant around here. I'm like, yeah, it's probably just your algorithm, or right? These are generally the childbearing years, right? Your later 20s, early 30s. That's pretty much when people have children. So that could also be true. But we always want to give pass and leeway for algorithms. But what's very evident on my algorithm is women were divorcing their husbands. Women were up and moving on and out. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with this. Again, I am not critiquing this stance. I understand that marriage can be very complicated. I understand people get married relatively young. There's new knowledge out there. There's new information. People change. People grow. People probably should have never been together from this jump. You know what I mean? Like, we're not here to really negate or to belittle anybody's choices. But I'm just talking about in mass, and I'm just talking about like modern revolts that women think are so revolutionary that they're a part of. There's a content creator who she kind of just talks about critiquing patriarchy, why men are dumb, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting because her passion is one in which can be a bit contagious. However, after a closer look and reading in Subverted, it's not anything new, right? But this content creator really felt as though she had cracked a code in terms of like freedom outside of patriarchy. And she has cracked a code in terms of like owning her body and her choice and, really living this life of fulfillment, which i.e. was in turn about other things outside of traditionalism, and those boring small town values, right? And I just thought this was very interesting because at first, you meet these type of radicals and you meet these type of people and they seem to have cracked the code, right? They're not mourning, they're not grieving about a relationship with a man and, vice versa. And in a sense, it does provide women a sense of freedom, right? It's always very troubling having these conversations. Again, I just think that some things just have not been done successfully because we don't have the language and it's just not articulated in a way that's very successful and palatable, right? And this kind of goes into the work of deconstruction. I don't think anybody has really deconstructed Christianity and faith and church culture and religion in a way that is successful. I don't think anybody has done that either when it comes to women within patriarchy, motherhood, divorce, all those different things. I just don't think the work has been done successfully. So what you really have is a lot of people who are just kind of passionate, and they're just really living their lives and they're riding on this thing, which is like old ideas, it's old ideas, you guys. I was so stunned in Browder's book, Subverted, when I just started to realize that like half of the feminists today have no idea of its origins, right? I remember when I first found this Black journalist, she was a feminist. I was so enamored in her work, right? First of all, she was highly educated, graduated from Ivy League. She had a great fan base going, she was doing all these really cool interviews with people with PhD. And this is probably when I was a little bit more obsessed about corporate validation. But overall, her work it just really spoke to me. I felt like she was so articulate, and all of these things she still is. I'm not taking away from that. But I thought it was very interesting because within her work, I noticed that there were, at the time, these were like millennials, right? So at the time when they were really popping off with their content, people were really fond of them. They were like Black scholars. And I always pose this question, right? Like, is the work really good, right? When it comes to Black scholars, like, is the work really good? Is it anything profound, or are they just the first, right? Because this is one of the most unfortunate things about being a Black scholar and being in the realm of academia, is that it's not something that is widespread, right? Most of our scholars are a little bit older, deceased, right? Where there's a lot of separation within the realm of academia because there's just a lot of like spots, right? A lot of space, right? It's very spatial. It's not anything that we're doing as a collective. We know that most African Americans are relegated to the realm of entertainment. So whenever I feel like there is a platform and one person is pretty much dominating that platform and that conversation, there is no room for critique. There's no room for critique. But I remember when I first started watching this person, I was like, she was making very bold statements like, I don't want this, I don't want that, I don't want to be a mother, I don't want, and at the time I was like, oh, wow. Like initially I thought this person had just been hurt. I was like, this is someone, and this is me posing judgment. I will admit that, right? Like, that's what we all do. But I was like, this is someone who's been hurt. This is someone who has had experiences. And as I started to listen more and more to the content, I was like, okay, this is someone who definitely feels insecure, and they feel as though they are not worthy or enough, essentially, to be chosen and to really be partnered with for the long term, right? And what really made me bring about those ideas was I just felt like the passion behind it also, as Browder would, I'm paraphrasing here, but she talked about how the passion of these women, for example, who were radicals about abortion and pro-abortion, how it was a bit of passion, but it was the same thing that was very terrifying. And I just think there's really something said about people who are so like serious and like so passionate about their ideas. You know what I mean? Like in their beliefs, because things change and you learn things, and you know what I mean? And when we talk about passion, let me dial it back and talk about why I think that this is it could be terrorizing. Is when people start to hear certain things repetitiously, when there's passion, there is, there's fuel there to act. I feel like people really start to become like that passion can sometimes blind people, right? It's the same thing with like racism, right? Like you have people who are like so passionate about hating another, and it's like, you see how that can be very dangerous. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, that's what I'm saying. And so, after studying this scholar's work and, following through with their content, learning, questioning things and so forth, I found it interesting. This was someone who eventually partnered. Okay. They eventually partnered, and I remember they were on a live and they were cooking dinner for their partner, and they were still trying to, assuage the community that they created, right? Which was this community of coercion, how we say that? Coercion towards young women. And it was like they persuaded these young women to not marry, to not partner, to not have children. And she had built this entire community, right? But then she partnered. But then she ultimately partnered. And then it was like, I felt like it was a bit dishonest. And I felt like there should have been some justification for her audience, because here it is, you built this entire community based off being a radical feminist, right? Which was self-defined at the time, because when I'm reading Subverted, I realized that feminism was just, so many people have different takes on feminism. Bell Hooks talked about how essentially it started off as women's rights, and then it became about male hating, and essentially, converted itself into lesbianism, and then like all these other things. Here in Subverted, she talks about how feminism was really just a matter of women gaining equality, and how, within the organization, they were not for abortion. Okay. They really found abortion to be extortion of women's bodies. Like, they didn't think it was okay. So it's just very interesting, right? And it's like, when you're a reader and you're trying to get to the truth of a thing, it's it's tough, because it's like there's always so many different people telling history. That's why it's like you do have to kind of diversify your reads and not be so narrow-minded and so passionate in what it is that you're standing on, because you just might be being misled, and that happened for her and for a lot of people. So anyway, yeah, I really felt like this content creator owed her audience somewhat of a justification, right? Here it is. I'm not partnering with a man. I'm not doing all these different things. And then you come out and you partner, right? After a little bit of work in therapy, after a little bit of self-love, self-care, And honestly, I had a lot of compassion for this creator, because I think something that is so common within Black women, and Bell Hooks talked about this, how when she entered into collegiate spaces, there was a narrative that was going around that Black women weren't going to be able to find good partners, right? They weren't going to be able to find educated partners. Bell Hooks talked about how this was the first time she had heard anything like this. She said growing up in the South, she knew of other Black men who were scholars, who were intelligent, who were in the world of academia. So she was just really taken back by these really kind of like white supremacist beliefs and limitations about Black love and the Black family. And it was unfortunate, because it kind of seemed like it was something that was a bit of a wildfire, and it kind of just reigned within these white institutions. And that is the narrative that I think a lot of Black women coming out of academia then adopted, right? And so I thought that was very interesting. And so this is why it's so important when you talk about ideas. It's like, yeah, just kind of like bringing it full circle here. It's like, man, you can get so caught up in an idea, you don't even know where that idea has even originated from, And back to what I was saying about the content creator online, although I think what we're doing in terms of like advocacy, in terms of, advocating for women and the abuse that they've endured against men, and the psychological abuse, and, really shining a light on the emotional abuse and so forth, I think this work is beautiful. I think it's needed. And I think that's what's important. But I do think that with that passion is then coupled with, rhetoric that is not necessarily true. And it's unfortunate, because people lie, right? People lie about statistics. People lie about, what is being published, right? When you have money, let me just say this within American society, when you have money, and I'm not talking about like just a little bit of money, I'm talking about like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, right? White man's money. Okay. What's really unfortunate is that you can create any narrative and put it in front of the media, and it can be promoted, and then eventually it'll be embedded into the consciousness of Americans, right? And that's what happened with abortion. Women were not for it. Black women were never for it. I talk about this all the time, but Black women were never for it. But they weren't then, right? They weren't then, and still aren't now, I don't really feel. But yeah, it started off with a lie. Essentially, that's pretty much the premise. And so when you start taking into consideration propaganda, right? You start taking into consideration the messages and the things that were sold. What is the byproduct of that? Like, what's going to be like, I really feel like we're making a lot of decisions based on our detriment. And I think what's really unfortunate is that because we're not really hopeful about the future, right? I've been listening to John Batiste here lately, and I absolutely love that Beethoven album. And he has this song on there. It's called the American Symphony Theme. And it is so melancholic, and it is hopeful, but it has very sorrow undertones. And I said, this is quite literally the American Symphony, right? It's this thing that is incredibly hopeless, right? It's this thing that is incredibly grotesque, and it's ugly, and it's depressing, right? But then there is, I don't want to say hopeless initially, but like there is hope, right? So it is a little bit of hope there, and it's hopeful because you can see the big city lights, and you can see the dreams, and you can engage with the art and the artist and all of these really great things that make up its melting pot. But at the same time, there is still that very grotesque history and that ugly truth that is America. You know what I mean? And that is the constant. So if you are someone who loves, piano and so, definitely check it out. Great album. But yeah. So propaganda, it really influences our lives. And the truth is that we do get ideas and we make it our truth, and we have no idea where it comes from. We have no idea the origin of that thought. and the reality is that there are so many white men who can buy things and do things and do it on such a large scale we can't even possibly fathom, right? And then they introduce it to us, and then it's fed to us repetitiously, and then it becomes our truth, right? And so I don't know what this podcast is really centering on. I don't know if it's just to kind of tell you guys to be more insightful about your life, be more introspective about your life and why you're thinking what you're thinking and doing what you're doing. Like, I think that there's something empowering about being an artist and being with the times and being current, because, you could be creating something and this is the time that it was supposed to be presented. You know what I mean? Like, you've had your experiences. Now you're at this place in your life where you're ready to share those experiences. And it just so happens that we're living in a day and age where it's okay and it's socially acceptable for you to share those ideas and those experiences, right? And you can build a community and you can help people. And that's amazing. But we're also living in a time where propaganda is very heavy. I was doing some self-reflective work and I was journaling, and I just thought about how I was so unhappy in my own life a lot of times, dealing with a particular situation, was because it didn't look like how I felt like it was supposed to look, right? And how did I feel like it was supposed to look? Like the media's images and representations of how it was supposed to look, And that is a thing that is incredibly crippling, right? And you talking about happiness and it being somewhat like a childlike thing. And it is in a sense, because it's like it doesn't measure up to our expectations, which are very unrealistic and they're based on fantasy. And so I'll say, when it comes to partnering with men, I think men grow resentful. And again, we're not excusing abuse. We're not excusing mistreatment, any of those things. But I will say, I think men grow resentful of women's fairy tales. I do. And I think it's unfortunate because I feel like as women, we are fed so many fairy tales. I don't even think we could possibly get to the truth about male and heterosexual relationships in this lifetime. I just don't. I mean, I don't even know what do you want to call it? The romance industry. I mean, look at Love at First Sight. Look at all these shows. You know what I mean? This is, you talk about $1 billion industry. Yeah, right. It's all about selling people the thing that they're missing. If we can package human connection for the Homo sapien and we can sell it back to you, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. That is the continuous sorrow of the American symphony. You know what I mean? Like, it's really crazy when you think about it. But yeah, y'all, like, I just think about this all the time because it's honestly something that begins to kind of fade, right? It's been so long. But there was a point in time in 2018 where things were easier, Granted, we were younger, but at the same time, things were easier because we made our own choices, right? Social media wasn't so embedded in our day-to-day lives, at least not for mine, right? I felt as though I was pretty active in my own life, right? With my choices, with my decisions. I wasn't blindsided by what's going on in California, what this person is doing, how this person is living, X, Y, and Z. I wasn't so bombarded with all of these different ranges of potential salaries. And, I just wasn't bombarded with all of that. I was in my world, I was in my truth, and I was managing my reality. And when I think back, when you start talking about relationships specifically and my partnerships and the dating of the guys that I had, looking back, I wouldn't date those guys today, right? Not because they were bad guys, okay? Not because they didn't have morals and values and those intrinsic things that I really liked, but because they're not socially acceptable. Right? It's no longer socially acceptable to date someone like that, right? Who doesn't have X, Y, and Z. And so you have to just be so mindful of the ways in which our brains have kind of been warped. And really, we've surrendered a lot of control in our personal lives about who we choose to partner with. I believe that this is why divorces are increasing, because I don't think that it's really a matter of personal choice and decision anymore. Right? I talk about this all the time, and I'll kind of wrap up here because I don't want to go on too long. I eat some lunch. But there really is something said about the bad boy myth, right? The bad boy myth, especially when you talk about Blackness, I do believe that it actually is rooted in anti-Blackness, right? It is to say that the boy who has style, the boy who maybe have, swagger, whatever the case may be, is bad. And when you think about the bad boy myth, a lot of times it's really centering on, especially when we talk about African American males, right? It is really centering on externals, right? Oh, he listens to a certain type of music, right? Oh, he plays basketball at the recreational center in the urban community. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's all of these figments of our imagination that make him bad, right? And I think that this kind of goes into the depersonalization, the dehumanization, and more so like the destruction of African American relationships and Black love, right? There's a misunderstanding there, but it's a constant that is a demonization of the Black male, right? It's painting him out to be this criminal, this predator, this, you know? And so what happens is I feel like you have these guys who would be considered nerds, right? I mean, I would be considered a nerd, but hear me out when I say this, because when we really take a look at nerd, we're not really looking at it from the sense of like, no, being a nerd means being intellectually capable. No, we're looking at it like someone who is socially inept, someone who has had adverse childhood experiences, someone who does not have emotional skills and capacity, someone who's very inexperienced, right? And so what we say, and we encourage women today, hey, date this guy, right? And what happens is you have this person who is filled with so much rage, so much insecurities, and then we're partnered with them because that's what we're told to do. And then it's a mess. It's a disaster, right? When you see serial killers, well, let's back it up. Whoa. Let's not go there. Let me retract that. My point is, we have started to fantasize about the least suspecting, right? And what that has done for a lot of women, I believe, I've observed, okay, this may not be a fact, okay, is that I think it's put a lot of women in very dangerous situations with people who are severely incompatible with them, people who really lack a lot of skills, okay, in terms of like partnership, like genuine partnership. And it's also created this normalization of violence, right? When you think about the red pill community, it is actually a community of those nerds that we're talking about, that society encourages young women to date because the man who may be more hygienic or maybe more stylish or whatever the case may be, right? He is considered a bad boy, right? And I've seen this, you have, there was a life coach. She was talking about this, good looking man, he's educated, all these different things, women always want that guy, right? And there was this guy who commented, and he was like, I'm all of those things, but I'm very loving. I'm a man of character, right? And it's like, that's the assumption. And I can honestly speak to this for myself, being a young woman who just genetically, you know what I mean? I guess you could say I'm considered attractive, right? I'm a little brown skinned girl. I'm not too hard on the eyes, People assumed that I was one way, right? Because I was fashionable, I was all these great things that were really, when you really package it, right? When you really unravel it, what you're really saying is that you are socially adequate, right? You know how to date, you know how to partner, you know how to hold a conversation, you know how to flirt when you need to flirt. You know what I mean? You're appropriate. You see what I'm saying? You're adequate, right? I was then characterized in a very negative way. And how often do we hear this from guys, right? Oh, I didn't speak to her because she looks like this or she looks like that, right? So what happens is you end up with people who are very dangerous because of those insecurities. And that is the byproduct, I personally think, of a lot of the people who are very passionate about anti-male and anti-woman rhetoric. So we're going to end there because I think that was really good. I know when it comes to explaining my thoughts, I hope you guys sometimes can follow me. I know it's all over the place. I know it's murky. I know it's messy. I know sometimes it doesn't make any sense, but I'm really hoping that we broke ground here because I just wanted to really shine a light on the ways in which media, ideas, and propaganda misleads so many of us in our lives, and it leads us to living lives that are very inauthentic, and it also leads us to wasting a lot of time when we're so passionate about a thing and we have no idea the origins of that thing. We know it did not come from our reality, right? It's not anything that we've experienced, right? If you are a radical feminist and you're anti-male, but you've never been hit by a male, you don't have any of these experiences, where is that coming from? Right? Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense. You're this man and you've never been socially adequate, right? You've never even known what it is to go on a date with a woman and have a healthy relationship, or even be in a mutual consenting like, how can you possibly create a platform, you know what I mean, for men, telling men how to be? You see what I'm saying? It's deeply rooted in propaganda, and it's incredibly dangerous. And it's setting a lot of people up to make very bad decisions that are going to impact them for the rest of their lives. So question the origins of things, understand that people can write books and it not be true, right? I remember, when dudes was out here publishing KDP like left and right, I'm like, you're nobody's author. I'm looking at the book. I'm like, there's all type of grammatical errors. Who wrote this? And people are on the news and they're doing all these great things, right? And it's like, whoa, you know what I mean? So you always have to take those things into consideration. Okay. When you're a man, you have power. They push a lot of ideas. Okay. And when the driving force is greed, it's very dangerous. Okay. People will go to any extent. So I hope you guys got something from this. I don't know what I'm going to call this pod, but have a great day. Happy Saturday. Peace.